I remember the exact moment my 81st birthday stopped feeling like a blessing and started feeling like a quiet kind of humiliation I never thought I would live to see. It was a Sunday afternoon in early October, the kind where the sunlight comes in soft through the kitchen window, making everything look warmer than it really is. My son had insisted we celebrate at his house this year. He said it would be easier for everyone, especially for me, with my cane and my slower steps. I didn't argue. At 81, you learn to accept what you're given, even when something in your chest tells you it's not really for you. Still, I dressed up that morning. Nothing fancy, just my pale blue cardigan, the one my late husband used to say made my eyes look younger than they had any right to be. I even took the time to curl my hair, just a little. Old habits don't leave you, not the ones tied to dignity. I held my cane firmly as I stepped out of the car that afternoon. It's a simple wooden cane, nothing special, but it's been my quiet companion for the past 3 years. Ever since my hip started giving me trouble, it's been the difference between standing tall and not standing at all. When I reached the front door, I could already hear laughter inside. For a moment, my heart felt full. Family. That word used to mean everything to me. My son, Daniel, opened the door with a quick smile. Not the kind that lingers, just the polite kind people give when they're distracted. "Hey, Mom. You made it," he said, stepping aside. Made it. I suppose at my age, just arriving somewhere is considered an achievement. I smiled anyway. Of course I did. Inside, the house looked nice. Decorated, even. There were a few balloons tied to the dining chairs, a cake sitting on the kitchen counter with white frosting and soft pink roses. Someone had put effort into it. And for a brief, fragile moment, I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this really was for me. Then I saw her. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood by the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up right away when I walked in. When she finally did, her smile was thin, practiced. "Happy birthday," she said. No hug, no warmth, just words. "Thank you, Melissa," I replied gently. I've always tried with her. From the very beginning. I welcomed her into this family with open arms, helped pay for part of their wedding, even watched the kids when they were little so she could have time for herself, as she used to say. I told myself relationships take time. Years later, I was still telling myself that. The living room was already filling up. A few relatives, some of Daniel's friends, even neighbors I barely recognized. People chatted, glasses clinked softly, someone turned on music in the background. I took a careful step forward, leaning slightly on my cane. And that's when I felt it. Not something anyone said, nothing that obvious. Just a shift. Conversations didn't stop when I entered, but they changed. Voices lowered. Eyes flickered, then looked away too quickly. It's a subtle thing, but when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to notice the things people don't say. I made my way toward the couch, moving slowly but steadily. Each step measured. Controlled. Dignified. That word mattered to me. Dignity. I sat down, adjusting my cardigan neatly over my lap. My hands rested on the curved handle of my cane, fingers tracing the worn wood. It grounded me. Across the room, I watched Melissa laugh at something someone said. Loud. Effortless. The kind of laugh that fills a room. But it never quite reached her eyes. At one point, she glanced in my direction. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even dislike. It was something colder. Something like dismissal. As if I were already less than present. "Mom, do you want something to drink?" Daniel called out from the kitchen. "Oh, just some water, please," I said. He nodded, but didn't bring it right away. Someone else pulled him into a conversation, and he forgot. I didn't remind him. You learn not to ask twice for small things. Not when you start feeling like a burden. After a while, I decided to stand up and get it myself. I placed my hand firmly on the cane, pressing down just enough to lift myself from the couch. It took effort, more than it used to, but I managed. I always do. One step, then another. The room continued around me, untouched by my slow progress. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard it. A soft voice, not meant for me, but not exactly hidden either. She moves like that, but insists on coming anyway. It was Melissa. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Another voice, one of her friends, I think, whispered something back. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the faint chuckle that followed. I kept walking. Because what else do you do at 81, when dignity is the only thing you have left to hold on to? You keep walking. even when every step feels heavier than the last. When I finally reached the kitchen counter, I placed my hand beside the sink and exhaled slowly. My fingers tightened around the edge for just a moment longer than necessary. Not from weakness, from restraint. I poured myself a glass of water, careful not to spill. My hands are steady, despite everything. Always have been. As I turned back toward the living room, glass in one hand, cane in the other, I caught my reflection briefly in the microwave door. An old woman. Small. Slower. Easier to overlook. But still standing. I walked back to the couch and sat down again, gently, deliberately. No one noticed. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. I looked around the room, at the decorations, the cake, the people laughing, and I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit until that moment. This celebration, it wasn't really mine. And whatever warmth I thought I felt when I first walked in that door, it was already beginning to fade. I sat there quietly, holding my glass of water, letting the condensation gather against my fingers, just to feel something real. Around me, the room carried on like I wasn't even part of it. Laughter rose and fell in waves. Plates clinked. Someone turned the music up just a little louder. It was the kind of gathering that would look warm in a photograph, but I've lived long enough to know that warmth and kindness are not always the same thing. I took a small sip of water and kept my eyes lowered. Not out of shame, out of awareness. Because once you start noticing the way people treat you, you can't unsee it. A few minutes later, Melissa walked past me, carrying a tray of appetizers, little bite-sized things she used to make when she first married my son. Back then, she would ask me for recipes. She'd stand beside me in the kitchen, smiling, calling me Mom, like it meant something. Now, she didn't even slow down as she passed. But she did say something. Not to me. To the room. Careful, everyone, she said lightly, with a small laugh. There's not a lot of space with you, no? She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Her eyes flicked toward my cane. Just for a second. A couple of people glanced at me, then quickly looked away. One man shifted his chair slightly, as if I might suddenly become an obstacle. I tightened my grip on the glass. Still smiling. Still pretending I didn't understand. Because that's what you do when you're trying to hold a family together, even when it's already slipping through your fingers. Daniel finally came over, standing beside me with his phone still in his hand. You doing okay, Mom? He asked. I looked up at him, searching his face for something familiar. Something steady. I'm fine, I said softly. And I meant it, in the way people mean it when they've decided not to make things harder for anyone else. He nodded quickly. Good, good. Then he hesitated, just for a moment. You might want to stay seated, though, he added. It's a bit crowded today. Stay seated. I glanced down at my hands resting on the cane. I can manage, I replied gently. I know, he said, already backing away. Just safer this way. Safer. That word lingered longer than it should have. Because it didn't feel like concern. It felt like containment. Like I was something that needed to be kept in place. He walked off before I could say anything else. And just like that, I was alone again. A guest at my own birthday. Time passed slowly after that. Not in minutes, but in moments. Small ones. Sharp ones. The kind that build quietly until they become something you can't ignore anymore. At one point, I noticed the cake had been moved from the kitchen to the dining table. Candles were already placed on top. 81 of them would have been too much, so they'd settled for a simple 8 and 1. I smiled at that. At least someone had thought of practicality. But no one called me over. No one said, let's gather around. Instead, people drifted toward the table on their own, forming small clusters, chatting, laughing. I watched from the couch, waiting, not for attention, just for acknowledgement. Melissa stood at the center of it all, directing things with small gestures of her hand. She adjusted the cake, repositioned the plates, told someone where to stand. She looked comfortable, in control, like the hostess of something that belonged entirely to her. And maybe it did. After all, it was her house, her space, her rules. I was just visiting. Even on my birthday, a little girl, my granddaughter, Emily, ran past me, her laughter bright and unfiltered. She slowed for a second when she saw me. Grandma, are you coming for the cake? She asked. Her voice was the only one that felt real. I smiled at her. In a minute, sweetheart. She nodded and ran off again. In a minute. I said it like I had all the time in the world. Like I wasn't waiting for someone, anyone, to come help me up. Or at least walk beside me. But no one did. Instead, I heard Melissa's voice again, clearer this time. Okay, let's just do this quickly before it melts. Quickly. I let that word settle in my chest. 81 years of life. And we needed to do it quickly. I placed my glass down on the small table beside me and looked at my cane. For a brief moment, I considered staying where I was, letting them sing without me, letting the moment pass as if I were already gone. But something inside me refused. Not pride, not stubbornness, something quieter, something older. The part of me that had survived loss, hardship, long nights, and longer years. The part that still believed I deserved to stand on my own birthday. So I leaned forward, pressing my hand firmly against the cane, and began to rise. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. The room didn't stop. No one turned. No one noticed. And as I took my first step toward that table, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I didn't yet understand. But I would. Soon enough. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the table when the room seemed to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough for me to feel it. That quiet kind of shift you only notice when you're the one being moved out of place. All right, everyone, gather in. Melissa called out, clapping her hands lightly as if she were organizing a meeting instead of a birthday. People tightened their circle around the table. Closer, closer, until there was barely any space left. I slowed my steps, adjusting my grip on the cane. The rubber tip pressed softly against the hardwood floor with each movement. Tap, pause, tap. No one made room. Not intentionally, but not accidentally either. I stopped just short of the group, standing at the edge of it all, close enough to see the candles flickering, but not quite part of the circle surrounding them. Daniel, I said gently, my voice calm, steady. He was standing near the cake, his arm around Melissa's shoulder. He turned halfway when he heard me. Yeah, Mom. Could you? I hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Could you help me over? It wasn't a big request. Just a simple step forward. A small gesture. Something a son would do without thinking. But instead of moving toward me, he glanced at Melissa. Just for a second. That was all it took. And she answered before he could. Oh, just a second, she said, her tone light, almost cheerful. We're about to light the candles. Then she looked directly at me. Not unkindly, but not kindly either. You're fine right there, she added. Right there. At the edge. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the handle of my cane. I'd like to come closer, I said softly. A simple sentence. But it landed heavier than I expected. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for a few people to glance between us. Melissa exhaled through her nose, just slightly, but I saw it. Then she stepped forward. Not toward me, but toward the small space in front of the table. And that's when it happened. Her hand reached out, not to help me, but toward my cane. At first, I thought she was going to steady it. Maybe even guide me. For a brief, foolish second, I believed that. But instead, she pulled it. Not violently, but firmly enough that my balance shifted. The cane slipped from my hand. And before I could react, she let it fall. It hit the floor with a sharp, hollow sound that cut through the room louder than any laughter had all afternoon. Everything stopped. The music, the conversations, even the soft flicker of movement around. The table seemed to freeze. I stood there, slightly off balance, my hand still hovering where the cane had been. For a moment, I didn't fully understand what had just happened. Not because it was unclear, but because it was unthinkable. My eyes slowly dropped to the floor. There it was. My cane, lying just a few feet away, close enough to reach. If I bent down, if I lowered myself, if I gave in, a quiet heat began to rise in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. Something heavier. I looked back up at Melissa. She was already looking at me. And then, she smiled. Not wide. Not friendly. Just enough to make her next words feel deliberate. Well, she said, tilting her head slightly. Go ahead. The room stayed silent. No one moved. No one spoke. And then she said it. Clear enough for everyone to hear. Go on, crawl and get it. The word hung in the air. Crawl. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Surely not here. Not in front of everyone. Not on my birthday. But no one reacted like it was a misunderstanding. No one laughed it off. No one corrected her. Which meant, they heard it exactly the way I did. My heart didn't race. It didn't pound. If anything, it slowed. The kind of stillness that comes when something inside you quietly breaks, but refuses to show it. I became aware of everything at once. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The faint scent of vanilla from the cake. The weight of every pair of eyes in that room. Some watching, some avoiding, some pretending not to see. And my son. Daniel said nothing. He stood there, frozen, his arm no longer around Melissa, but not stepping away from her either. Not stepping toward me. That was the moment. Not when the cane hit the floor. Not even when she told me to crawl. But when my own son chose silence. That was the moment I understood exactly where I stood. I looked down at the cane again. Then slowly, very slowly, I took a breath. And for the first time that afternoon, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel weak. I didn't even feel embarrassed. I felt clear. Because in that single moment, everything became exactly what it was. No more pretending. No more guessing. No more hoping things would get better. This was the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, has a way of giving you strength you didn't know you still had. I adjusted my footing carefully, keeping my balance without the cane. Every movement controlled. Every breath steady. I did not bend. I did not reach for it. And I certainly did not crawl. Instead, I lifted my head and looked straight at her. And though my voice was quiet, it carried through that silent room in a way I hadn't expected. No, I said. Just one word. But it changed everything. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. No, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. At 81, you learn that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet refusal to become what someone else is trying to reduce you to. For a moment, no one moved. Melissa's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Just slightly. The corners of her lips tightened, like she hadn't expected resistance. Not from me. Oh, she said, tilting her head again. Her tone still light, but edged now with something sharper. Don't be dramatic. It's just a joke. A joke. I let that word settle. Because I had heard it before. People say cruel things, and then hide behind that word when they don't want to be held accountable. I kept my eyes on her. It didn't sound like one, I replied calmly. A small murmur moved through the room. Not loud enough to interrupt, but enough to signal discomfort. People shifted their weight. Someone cleared their throat. Still, no one stepped forward. Melissa gave a soft laugh, this time a little more forced. Everyone's so sensitive these days, she said, glancing around as if inviting agreement. I mean, it's not like she can't pick it up. She gestured lightly toward the cane on the floor. That gesture, that casual dismissal, landed harder than the words themselves. I followed her gaze for a moment, looking down at the cane. Then back at her. I can, I said. My voice didn't shake. But I won't. That was the difference. Not ability. Choice. Another pause. Longer this time. More uncomfortable. Daniel finally shifted where he stood. I saw it in the corner of my eye. The way his shoulders moved, like he was about to step in. For a second, I thought he might. Melissa, he said quietly. Just her name. Nothing more. But even that seemed like too much effort for him. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on me. Well, then I guess it's just going to stay there, she said with a small shrug. And just like that, she turned her back on me. Turned back to the cake. To the candles. To the people who were far more comfortable pretending this moment hadn't just happened. All right, she said, clapping her hands once more, her voice bright again. Let's not ruin the mood. We're here to celebrate. Celebrate. The word echoed strangely in my mind. I stood there without my cane, feeling the weight of my body shift slightly as I adjusted my balance. It wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy either. Every second mattered. Every movement required thought. But I stayed standing, because sitting down now, without it, would be harder than staying upright. And I refused to give her anything else. Okay, ready? Melissa said, lighting the candles one by one. The small flames flickered to life, casting a soft glow across the cake. Across her face. Across the room that had suddenly become very quiet again. Happy birthday to you. Someone started, hesitantly. Then others joined in. Voices layered over each other, uneven at first, then stronger, like they were trying to smooth over what had just happened with something familiar. Something easy. I didn't sing. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching. Watching the people I had loved, supported, stood beside for decades, choose comfort over courage. Watching my son avoid my eyes. Watching Melissa smile as if she had done nothing wrong. The song ended. There was a small round of applause. Melissa leaned forward slightly, gesturing toward the candles. Go ahead, she said, looking at me again. Her tone was sweet. Too sweet. Make a wish. A few people chuckled softly, Like this was all part of some normal exchange. Like nothing had been broken. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I said, quietly, I already did. That caught her off guard. Just enough. What? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow, careful step forward. Without the cane. Then another. The distance wasn't far, but in that moment, it felt longer than it should have. The room watched. Closely now. Because something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But unmistakably. I reached the table. Close enough to feel the warmth of the candles. Close enough to finally stand where I was meant to be all along. I placed both hands lightly on the edge of the table, steadying myself. Not out of weakness, but out of control. Then I looked at the cake. At the numbers. 8. 1. 81 years. And in all those years, I had learned something that no one in that room seemed to understand yet. Respect is not something you ask for. And it's not something you beg to keep. It's something you carry. Or something you take back. I lifted my head and blew out the candles in a single, steady breath. The flames disappeared instantly, leaving behind thin trails of smoke that curled into the air. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that comes when people realize, too late, that something important has just changed. I straightened slowly, carefully, and then, without looking at anyone else, I spoke. Pick it up, I said. My voice was calm, directed, unmistakable. Melissa blinked. I'm sorry, she said. I turned my head just slightly, meeting her eyes again. My cane, I said. Pick it up. No anger. No raised tone. Just a simple request. But this time, it wasn't one I was willing to let go unanswered. I stood there, waiting. Not moving, not breathing loudly, just holding my ground. The room felt smaller, tighter, every pair of eyes quietly shifting between me and Melissa. I could feel the weight of their attention like a tangible thing pressing in on all sides. Melissa's face was a study in disbelief. She had expected compliance, submission, and instead, she got calm, measured resistance. She took a small step toward the cane, her hand hesitating in midair. Her smile was gone, replaced by something sharper, calculated irritation. Just pick it up, I repeated, my voice even firm. No tremor, no pleading. Not that she had given me any reason to plead. The room stayed silent. My son, Daniel, still didn't intervene. He shifted his weight, tugged nervously at his collar, but didn't move toward me. He had chosen his position in this conflict long before, and now, silence was all he had to offer. Melissa's hand twitched, hovering over the cane like she was debating whether to bend down or leave it. It's fine where it is, she said finally. Her words clipped. Your definition of fine doesn't match mine, I said softly, allowing my gaze to meet hers. Every word deliberate, every syllable weighted with years of endurance, patience, and, yes, betrayal. A few guests shuffled uneasily. Some whispered to one another. One neighbor cleared their throat, a small gesture of discomfort. But no one stepped forward. I sighed quietly, not out of frustration, but from the realization of how many years I had underestimated the subtle cruelty a person could carry under a smile. A person you trusted. A person you had welcomed into your home, nurtured, and helped grow. Finally, Melissa made her choice. Slowly, reluctantly, she bent down and picked up the cane. The sound of it scraping softly against the floor seemed impossibly loud in the hush that had fallen. She straightened quickly, holding it as if it were a mere object, nothing more. Nothing personal. I watched her for a moment, letting her sense the stillness I carried with me. No rush, no urgency in my movements. The silence itself was my statement. Then, I walked past her, step by careful step, each movement deliberate. My grip on the cane firm but unhurried. I passed the table, my back straight, my head high, and I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Control. The whispers in the room didn't disturb me. I ignored the small coughs and the shuffling of feet. My presence, calm, unbroken, unashamed, spoke louder than any words I could have used. When I reached the couch, I placed the cane gently beside me, sat down with dignity intact, and took a slow breath. The room remained quiet for a moment, as if holding its collective breath. Melissa turned back to the cake and the guests, but I could see it in the corner of my eye, the subtle shift in her posture. Her confidence faltered, just enough for me to notice. I didn't celebrate it, didn't make a scene, but I acknowledged it silently. I had not cowered. I had not begged. I had not crawled. And in that quiet refusal, I reclaimed something far greater than a cane or even my place at the table. I reclaimed the acknowledgement of my strength, the reminder that dignity is not given. It is preserved, claimed, and, when necessary, defended. The song resumed, the clinking of glasses started again, but now the air had changed. Not everyone understood it, not yet. Some still acted as though nothing had happened. But I did. And in that moment, the distance between submission and self-respect had never felt clearer. Melissa might have orchestrated the fall of my cane, but she had underestimated the rise of my presence. Step by deliberate step, I reminded the room, and myself, that some things cannot be taken from you without your consent. And I, for one, would never consent. After settling back on the couch, I let the room return to its routine, but my mind was far from calm. Every glance, every murmur, every cautious laugh carried echoes of what had just happened. I realized that the small victories of the day weren't measured in applause or recognition. They were in the quiet awareness of who I was and what I refused to allow. For a long time, I simply watched. The cake sat untouched for a few more moments, and I noticed the way people continued their conversations as if nothing had shifted. But I knew they had felt it. That subtle, unspoken recognition that the power dynamics had quietly changed. It wasn't loud or confrontational, but it was undeniable. His wife and his mother. But in that pause, I saw his realization too. The understanding that respect, once ignored, has consequences that are slow but inevitable. I sipped my water slowly, feeling its coolness, grounding myself. For the first time that day, I allowed myself a small measure of satisfaction. Not vengeance. Not theatrics. Just clarity. I was still here. I was still capable. I had not been diminished by cruelty or indifference. My presence alone carried weight, even if it was subtle, even if the world around me pretended otherwise. My thoughts drifted briefly to the future, how I would navigate the family dynamics from this point forward. I understood that some bridges were already burned, and some roles had shifted irrevocably. Sink a little deeper into the couch, still holding onto the cane beside me, not because I needed it to stand, but because it anchored me. It was a reminder of what I had endured and what I had refused to allow to define me. The room buzzed again, but this time I felt the shift. My presence had changed the atmosphere. The subtle tension in the air was unmistakable. People spoke in quieter voices, their laughter more cautious. They were aware now, aware that I had not been defeated, that the quiet refusal to crawl had spoken volumes. I watched Melissa closely. Her movements were precise, almost rigid, as if she were calculating her next steps. She offered no apology, no acknowledgement beyond the gestures necessary to maintain the facade of the party. But I noticed it, the tiny hesitation in her smile, the slight flicker in her eyes whenever she glanced at me. I let that settle in, but it was effective. I thought of the cane lying beside me. It had been a tool, a support, and in that moment, a symbol, not of weakness, but of endurance, of autonomy, of the quiet authority that comes from decades of life, experience, and the unspoken understanding that one will not be diminished without consent. For the first time that afternoon, I allowed myself a small, internal smile. Not one for the camera, not one for the guests, not one for Melissa, but for me. I had endured humiliation and had turned it into quiet power. I had maintained my dignity when it could have so easily been stripped away. And I had sent a message without raising my voice, without confrontation, only through deliberate choice and measured presence. Had long suspected, my presence and dignity were often taken for granted, and it was time to ensure that would never happen again. Seated, savoring the clarity I now held. Every step of the day, every slight, every act of dismissal, had given me insight and focus. I had learned to measure patience against presence, humiliation against authority, and silence against calculated action. Tonight, I would review my plans, organize my thoughts, and prepare for the moments ahead. The birthday had begun as a potential humiliation, but it had transformed into a revelation of my own power. The control I had exercised quietly today was only the beginning. From now on, every interaction, every decision, every gesture would serve to reinforce the boundaries I had silently established. For the first time all day, I felt truly calm. Not because the conflict had ended, but because I had recognized my own agency. I would not be diminished. I would not be overlooked. And I would ensure that my place within this family, whether they accepted it or not, would remain secure, respected, and unassailable. The party was over. Guests had left, the balloons sagged, and the soft hum of evening replaced the earlier clinking of plates and laughter. I remained in the quiet house, sitting in my favorite chair, the cane beside me, feeling the weight of the day. Every memory of Melissa's cruel words and gestures was still fresh, but instead of anger, I felt clarity. I understood the dynamics now, who would challenge me, who would stay silent, and how easily appearances masked intent. I began to think strategically. Over the years, I had accumulated small but significant resources, my savings, investments, the family home, and my voice, which had often been underestimated. All of these could be leveraged, not recklessly, not vindicatively, but with precise, deliberate action. This was not about revenge for the sake of anger. It was about reclaiming control over my own life and ensuring respect for the years I had lived and the sacrifices I had made. I pulled out a notepad from the side table and began jotting down ideas. Letters to review, accounts to secure, conversations to have, boundaries that needed to be set, both financial and personal. Each item was carefully considered. Every action would be measured and deliberate, a reflection of my authority and clarity rather than emotional reaction. Daniel came in quietly, hesitating at the door. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. His voice carried concern, tinged with guilt, but I didn't look at him. I wanted him to understand through observation, not through explanation. "I'm fine," I replied evenly, still writing. "Everything is under control." He lingered for a moment, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts, then quietly left the room. That was the acknowledgement I needed. The recognition that I was fully capable of managing the consequences of what had just happened, and that my decisions would carry weight moving forward. As the evening deepened, I reviewed my plans mentally. Every small action I took from now on would reinforce my autonomy and authority. I considered the subtle ways to assert influence, ensuring that no one could ever undermine my dignity again. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about foresight and measured action. Looking around the empty living room, I felt a sense of empowerment. Melissa's actions had revealed weaknesses in her own sense of control and understanding of respect. Daniel's silence had revealed his hesitancy and lack of courage to defend what should have been instinctive. And I had observed it all, calmly, deliberately, and with a growing sense of resolve. The grandchildren, who had been blissfully unaware during the party, would also witness a subtle change in family dynamics over time. I realized that my measured actions would serve as lessons for them, showing that dignity and respect must be claimed and preserved. I sipped my water and let the quiet settle. There was no rush, no need for immediate confrontation. The power of the day had been quietly reclaimed, and from this point forward, every interaction, every decision, every gesture would reinforce the boundaries I had silently established. For the first time since the party began, I felt a profound calm. The humiliation had not broken me. It had clarified the path forward. I would move carefully, deliberately, and strategically. The control of my life, my respect, and my place in the family would no longer be left to chance or the whims of others. Tonight, I had begun the process. And tomorrow, I would continue it. My birthday had been intended to diminish me, to provoke submission. Instead, it had strengthened me, sharpened my clarity, and set the foundation for measured, intentional authority that no one could ignore. The evening had settled fully into night, and the house was quiet. The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows across the furniture, and I felt a sense of control that had been missing for most of the day. I had observed, I had reflected, and I had planned. Now, it was time to act with quiet precision. I began with the practical matters. I reviewed my finances carefully, checking accounts I controlled directly. Every transaction, every scheduled payment, every standing order. I ensured that nothing could be altered or influenced by anyone else. This was not about distrust. It was about securing the life I had built over decades. Respecting myself required that I also safeguard my independence. Then, I turned my attention to the home. I made a mental note of which rooms were commonly accessed by Melissa or Daniel and considered the subtle adjustments I could make to establish boundaries. Not confrontational barriers, but markers of autonomy. Small details, a locked drawer here, a reorganized space there, that reinforced the understanding that some things were mine and mine alone. Next, I considered communication. The family often assumed that silence was compliance. Today had proven otherwise. I resolved to be deliberate with my words going forward. No idle explanations, no unnecessary apologies. I would speak with clarity, and each statement would carry weight because it would be backed by action. Words alone were powerless. They had to be paired with consistent boundaries. As I sat in the quiet, I reflected on the symbolic importance of the cane. What had begun as a simple tool of support had become an emblem of my agency. By refusing to crawl, I had reclaimed authority in a subtle but undeniable way. Every decision moving forward would build upon that foundation, reinforcing the message that I was not to be underestimated or overlooked. I also thought about the upcoming days and gatherings. Melissa's behavior had revealed patterns: her need for control, her reliance on theatrics, her expectation of submission. Each of these patterns could be anticipated and subtly countered. My strategy would involve careful observation, measured responses, and patience. The family would learn, slowly but surely, that respect was earned and enforced, not assumed. In that quiet, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The embarrassment and humiliation that had threatened to overwhelm me had been transformed into insight and strength. I knew now that power was not demonstrated through confrontation, but through deliberate action, calm authority, and the refusal to allow disrespect to stand unchallenged. By the time the house was fully dark and silent, I had mapped out the first steps: letters to be drafted, accounts to be secured, and subtle markers of personal space to be established. Each action would reinforce my presence and autonomy without the need for dramatics. This was strategy, not vengeance. This was patience exercised with authority. And finally, I allowed myself to rest, confident that tomorrow I would continue the careful shaping of my influence. The events of the day had been a test, one I had passed not through force, but through steadfast composure and deliberate thought. My dignity remained intact, and my quiet power had begun to assert itself in ways the family could neither ignore nor underestimate. Tonight, I had turned a moment of humiliation into the first step of measured empowerment. Every subsequent action would build on this clarity, ensuring that the respect I deserved would not remain unclaimed, and that no one could ever diminish me without consequence. The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the windows, painting the living room in warm gold. I sat at the kitchen table, my cup of tea steaming, reflecting on the events of the previous day. The weight of Melissa's actions, the silence of my son, and the awkward tension among the guests had all left their mark, but I no longer felt small. Instead, I felt clarity, a calm awareness that would guide the next steps. I began to outline my intentions quietly in my mind. There was no need for immediate confrontation. The situation called for measured, deliberate action. Every decision, every conversation, every movement would reinforce the boundaries I had quietly established during my birthday. The cane remained close by, not because I needed support, but as a symbol of my independence and careful control over my own space. I thought about how subtly power could be asserted. The gestures of yesterday had already demonstrated it. Refusing to crawl, standing firm without anger, and maintaining composure had shifted the room's dynamics. People had noticed, even if they wouldn't admit it. Melissa's carefully controlled movements, her hesitant smiles, the quiet unease of the others, they were all signs that authority had quietly returned to me. Daniel entered the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and paused as he noticed my calm presence. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" he asked. There was caution in his voice, a recognition of yesterday's events. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I let the moment settle. "I'm well," I said evenly, my tone firm but gentle. Yesterday was revealing. He hesitated, as if searching for words that wouldn't upset the new equilibrium. I could see the conflict in him, the desire to protect Melissa, the desire to support me. I nodded slightly, acknowledging his struggle without indulging it. Silence, carefully held, was often more instructive than speech. As the morning progressed, I reviewed the practical measures I had begun the night before. Financial accounts were checked, my property organized, and plans for future discussions with Daniel and Melissa were carefully considered. Each action was designed not to humiliate or punish, but to create a clear framework of respect and personal authority. I understood now that subtle control, applied consistently, would be more effective than any dramatic confrontation. The grandchildren arrived mid-morning, their energy a bright counterpoint to the lingering tension. I observed them quietly, noting how my calm presence influenced them. They were learning, even unintentionally, that dignity and respect are maintained through deliberate action and measured restraint. I smiled softly, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. By midday, Melissa appeared, likely expecting the usual compliance. Instead, she found me engaged in practical matters, serene, and quietly observant. Her attempts at light conversation were met with measured responses, polite, firm, unshaken. She sensed the shift immediately, though she couldn't articulate it. The subtle authority I carried was unmistakable, and her composure wavered slightly as she realized yesterday's actions had not diminished me. Daniel lingered nearby, watching. He could see, as I had known he would, that I had reclaimed my position within the household, not through confrontation, but through calm, deliberate strategy. The unspoken lesson was clear. Respect is observed, enforced, and maintained through consistent action, not empty words. As the day unfolded, I moved through the house with purpose, attending to small tasks, observing interactions, and maintaining a presence that quietly reinforced boundaries. Each step, each gesture, was intentional, creating a pattern that could not be ignored or dismissed. By evening, I felt the satisfaction of having established control without conflict. The lesson of the previous day had been internalized, both by myself and by the family. Melissa had learned, through quiet observation, that attempts to diminish me would be met with composed resistance. Daniel had understood, through my actions, that loyalty and respect are inseparable, and that silence in the face of injustice is a choice, not an inevitability. And I, having maintained dignity, independence, and awareness, understood something essential. Real power is not loud or impulsive. It is deliberate, patient, and quietly transformative. My birthday had become more than a celebration or a humiliation. It had become a turning point, a demonstration of the subtle, enduring strength that comes from decades of life, experience, and unwavering self-respect. The following morning, the house was quiet, bathed in the soft golden light of early spring. I sat in my favorite chair, the cane resting beside me, and allowed myself a deep, measured breath. For the first time in many years, I felt a clarity that had nothing to do with survival. It was about completeness. Yesterday's humiliation, Melissa's cruelty, and even Daniel's hesitation had all led to this, a moment of full awareness of my own strength and dignity. I thought about the events that had unfolded. My refusal to crawl, my calm assertion of presence, and the deliberate patience I had maintained had changed something irrevocable. The family had witnessed it, not as a spectacle, but as undeniable truth. Respect, I realized, is earned and observed, and it cannot be taken without consent. As I looked around the living room, the memories of decades of life with this family came flooding back. Every sacrifice, every birthday celebrated, every quiet moment of love and support. I saw them all now through the lens of resilience. And I understood something essential. Life does not measure our worth by how others treat us, but by how we respond to challenges, especially those that come from those we love. Daniel appeared at the doorway, hesitant but seeking connection. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said softly. No words could erase yesterday's events, but the recognition of my strength mattered more than any apology. I met his gaze and simply nodded. There was understanding in that silence, a recognition that I had reclaimed my place, and that my authority within the family was not to be questioned. Melissa lingered in the kitchen, avoiding direct eye contact, perhaps realizing that her attempt to diminish me had failed. I said nothing. There was no need for words. My quiet composure spoke volumes. Every step, every glance, every measured gesture had communicated what words never could. Dignity is preserved through patience, observation, and deliberate choice. I thought of the grandchildren, playing nearby, unaware of the tensions and lessons being absorbed. One of them looked up at me and smiled, innocent and bright, and in that moment I realized that my resilience would leave a legacy. They would learn that strength comes from within, and that one can maintain integrity and power even in the face of humiliation. By afternoon, the house was still and peaceful. I moved through the rooms, arranging small details, ensuring my space reflected both care and autonomy. The subtle markers of my presence, the careful placement of personal items, the steady calm in my interactions, were reminders to myself and to the family that respect is not optional. As evening approached, I sat by the window, the last rays of sunlight falling gently across the floor. I reflected on the full circle of the day and the lessons it carried. The birthday had begun with the potential to wound, but it had transformed into a testament to endurance, strategy, and quiet power. Every insult, every hesitation, every slight had been met with composed action, resulting in an outcome that restored dignity and authority without confrontation or anger. For the first time in a long while, I felt complete. Not triumphant in the dramatic sense, but whole. My strength, my presence, and my self-respect were fully intact. The family had witnessed it. The grandchildren had absorbed it, and I had claimed it firmly for myself. As night fell, I finally rested, the cane beside me and my mind at ease. The events of the past day would not define me. They had only revealed the depth of my resilience. And in that quiet moment, I understood. Life's true victories are measured not in outward acknowledgement, but in the unwavering preservation of one's dignity and the calm, deliberate reclaiming of respect that is rightly one's own. I closed my eyes, feeling the completeness of the day. The humiliation had passed, the lessons had been learned, and the family had seen, without question, that I would not be diminished. And with that, I felt an enduring peace settle over me, a knowledge that my place, my voice, and my power were unshakable and had always been mine to hold.